With Hashem's help, we will learn today Yevamos Daf Mem. We are in the holy city of Yerushalayim, Ki Mitzion Teitzei Soira. We are in Shula's library in Rechavia. We would like to thank Rabbi Yossi and Hinda Swerdloff of sharing this beautiful library with us, with our shir. And we will continue where we left off last time, which is on Daf Lamed Tes Amud Beis, all the way in the bottom of the line. A quick recap. We learned before the machlokes between Abu Shol and the Chachamim. Abu Shol is of the opinion that being that now meaning Bizman HaMishnah, people's kavana isn't purely l'shem mitzvahs yibum, therefore he felt that it's ideal now to do chalitza better than yibum. The Chachamim hold that the kavana is not that relevant. Yevamos yavai aleha mikol makayim, and yibum comes before chalitza. The Gemara previously quoted the Braisa. The Braisa says Yevamos yavai aleha mitzvah. There was a back and forth that before Reuven married Rachel, when Rachel was a single woman that was never married yet, Shimon was allowed to marry her, did not have to marry her. Now that she married Shimon's brothers Reuven, she became Asur on Shimon. And when there's a mitzvah of Yibum, so she goes back to being mutter to him. And the Braisa was using expressions, you would think that she would be just as permissible as before. Yevamos yavai aleha mitzvah. So Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi explained this Braisa that it's going according to Abu Shol. The back and forth is that just like Shimon before could have married her l'shem noi, l'shem ishus, you would think that after Rachel becomes a widow, he would be allowed to marry her regardless his kavana. So that's the Braisa telling you mitzvah, Abu Shol, that he needs to marry her only l'shem kavanas mitzvah sibum. Rava went along and said that this Braisa can even be authored, can even go according to the opinion of the Chachamim. What's the meaning of the Braisa that you would think that now she goes back to be the way she was before? Before Reuven married Rachel, Shimon could marry Rachel, did not have to marry her. The two options wasn't the kavana, was just he could have or could not have married her. So you would think now that after Reuven dies, he could marry her or not. And the Gemara, what's or not? Or chalitza, that Yibum and chalitza are equally good. So the Braisa is the Chachamim. No, that it's a mitzvah, Yibum is before chalitza. So now the Gemara is going to ask a question against Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi's explanation. Against the explanation that the author of the Braisa, that the Tan of the Braisa is Abu Shol. Why? Because this Braisa began with a similar back and forth by the mitzvah of the mincha that is eaten by the Kohen after he brings the kemitza, after he offers the part of the karban mincha on the mizbeach. So we're going to go to Daf Lamed Tes Amud Beis, Eima Reisha. The Reisha of the Braisa of Yibum, says the following. It says in the Chumash, Matzois te'achel b'makim kodesh, that the shiyarei mincha, after the flour offering is offered by taking from it a kemitza and burned on the mizbeach, the remaining of it is made into a matzah and it's eaten b'makim kodesh. So the Braisa says mitzvah. What does that mean? Daf mem, the exact same wordings as we had before. Shebetchila, meaning before people were magdish the flour, hoisa olav b'chlal heter. That flour was muter dika flour. Nesra. Now that it became hegdish, no one can eat of it until you took the kemitza off. But after the kemitza was taken off and offered on the mizbeach v'chazra v'hutra, now the shiyarei mincha couldn't be eaten. So the Braisa says, Yochel tachzer lehetera harishon. You would think that it could be as permissible as before. So Talmud Leimer matzois te'achel b'makim kadosh mitzvah. So it says the Gemara exactly, Bishleim Ravam, who explained the sefer of this Braisa that it goes even according to the Chachamim. And by Yibum, what was the two options? That you would have thought that Shimon could marry her or could do chalitza. He could do it or not do it. It's not kavana. It's the doing it or not. Here also, you would have thought matzah is teiachal b'makom kaddish mitzvah means that originally shebetchila ha'isa olav b'chlal heter, meaning that before they were magdish the flour, if anyone wanted to eat it, you could. If people would want not to eat it, you can't. Now you are magdish it, no one can eat it. But after the part that needs to be offered on the mizbeach was offered, chazra v'hutra. So what's the back and forth? Yachol tachzor le'teir harishin, meaning that ratza eichla, ratza eino eichla. That you would think that now you don't have to eat the shiyari mincha. If you want, you could eat it. It's not usur. And if you want, you don't have to eat it. And the Gemara stops it and says, no, that's for sure not the meaning. Ratza eino eichla. There's never an option not to eat it because it says that v'achlu oisam asher kupar b'heim. Meaning, Malame, that we learn from this pasuk, that when the Kahanim eat, the remaining of any carbon, including the remaining of a mincha of a flour carbon, that through the eatings of the Kahanim, that ubaylim ischaprim, do the owners get their atonement.
Meaning you would think before that the idea, just like you had choice, so here you also have choice.
And so there is what is the choice? So here the choice cannot be between eating and not eating, but there is still a choice, explains the Gemara. Ella, you would have thought ratzahu eichla, ratza kain achar eichla, that the choice between eating or not goes on the kain who did the avodah. That you would think that any one kain can eat the shiyarim of the mincha. It doesn't have to be the kain who brought the mincha, who brought the kemitza. And that's symmetrical to the Seifa, that you would think that he could do Yibum or not Yibum. That this kohen could eat it, or this kohen does not have to eat it. So the Braisa says, Matzah is teyachal b'makam kadesh, is that there is a mitzvah, it's ideal for this kohen to eat it. So Rav is interpreting the Seifa of the Braisa l'chachamim, the symmetry of this Braisa and the Reisha would work exactly the way it works in the Seifa. But according to Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi's interpretation, that the Braisa goes according to Abba Shaul, and when the Braisa suggested in the Seifa that you would think that he could or cannot, it's not about Yibum, it's about you would think that the Kavana could be like the Kavana he had before. In other words, it's not about him doing the act, it's about what does he have in mind, that you would think he can marry her l'shem noi, so mitzvah means he can only do it l'shem mitzvah. Here, there's no kavanas here. Here, l'cha'ira, the yes or no is only about does he have to or not have to eat it. And according to Abba Shaul's, if the Braisa is Abba Shaul's opinion, then the Reisha would not be symmetrical with the Sefer. What is the yes or no by kavana? And v'chi if you're going to suggest that there is two options when it comes to the kavana of the eating of the shiyarei mincha, which is that you would think that the kohen can eat it stam because he's hungry. Eating it when his stomach is when he's not yet full, which is the right way of eating karbanis. You're hungry and you're eating to satisfy your hunger. Ratza achilas gasa eichla, that you would think that the kohen is allowed to eat the shiyarei mincha even if he's already full. And when a person is full and still they eat, that eating is called achilas gasa, a gross eating, and it's not an ideal way to eat b'chlal. And the Gemara is saying that is not even a havamina, that no one would even have thought without the pasuk that that's an option, because achilas gasa mishma achila, eating when a person doesn't need to eat, halachically is not even called eating. Like we were taught by Reish Lakish, that if a person is going to have an achilas gasa on Yom Kippur, just a practical example, most people, they probably overdo it. They get ready to fast. So right before the fast, by the Sudas HaMafsekes, people overeat. That means when Yom Kippur enters, most people are very full. So midda eiraisa, if a person then, God forbid, we're not suggesting a person should eat, but if a person ate when they're stuffed on Yom Kippur, patir, miloi suona. Reish Lakish says they're not violating the biblical obligation. The Torah says you should afflict yourself. How do you afflict yourself? By not eating. In other words, when you eat, you're going against affliction. But when a person is stuffed and they eat, that's also an affliction. It's not called eating. So that for sure would not have been a havamina. So Akasha, so the Gemara answers, and Elon. So maybe you would suggest that again, for it to be symmetrical with the Seifa, it's not about doing the act or not doing the act, but it's doing the act in two different ways. So maybe Abba Shaul would explain the Reisha of the Mishnah that maybe you can eat it as matzah, and if you want, then maybe you can have it as chametz. In other words, when they prepared the shiyarei mincha, maybe we did not care if that would turn into chametz. Ratza machlo oichla, ratza chametz oichla.
Changing the ratio?
No, we're just explaining how that can even work according to the way Abba Shaul works, and it would still work out the two options symmetrical to the Seifa. More says it can be, because it says in the pasuk loy seiafei chametz. The pasuk really reads loy seiafei chametz, chalki nosati oisame ishay. But al pidrush, we're putting the word chelkam, which is going to the Seifa of the pasuk, we put it together with the Reisha. That loy seiafei chametz chelkam, which means Reish Lakish says that even the chelkam of the Kahanim should also not be made as chametz. B'chlal on the Beis HaMikdash there was no chametz. There's only two exceptions for that. There's one exception with the carbon sibur, and that was the shtei halechem that was brought together with the two kvasim on Shavuos. And by a carbon yachid, the only exception there where chametz was permitted was that we used to bring 40 challahs together with a carbon taida. From the 40 challahs, they were grouped into 4 categories, 10 of each category. One group of 10 of those 40 were chametz. But aside of those two exceptions, there was never chametz in the Beis HaMikdash. In other words, again, what would be the two options, which is not about eating it or not eating it, but in eating it itself, what would be the two options according to that Rabbi Yitzchak's interpretation, and it would work. So the Gemara says, let me tell you how Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi would stand his ground. The Seifa is Abba Shaul, and the Reisha would mean El Ratza Matzah Oichla, Ratza Chalut Oichla. There are two ways of preparing matzahs themselves. One way is simply baking it, and one way is called Chalita or Chalut, which is that you scald the flour before you bake it with burning hot water, and then you bake it. So you would have thought that such a thing is permissible. As the Gemara is going to point out, there are other areas in halacha. And to go straight, I'll tell you by heart, the Gemara is going to speak about matzah on Pesach. That matzah cannot be chametz. But if the matzah was prepared by first one scalded the flour and then immediately you baked it, it's kosher matzah. So you would have thought that just like before a person was magdish this flour, if you want to use this flour for matzah, you could have eaten it any way you wanted it. And now that it became hugdash nesra, and now that chazra lehetera rishayna, you might have thought you can do chalot. That's why the pasuk says that no, that's the whole pasuk. Matzah is te'echom v'akam kadosh, mitzvah, not chalot. No, so now the Gemara just wants to clarify. Hay chalot, hay chidami. If you scalded it and it's still matzah, then what would be wrong with that? Hamatzah. And v'iloi matzah. And if by scalding it you don't later make it into matzah, that's for sure not good, because matzah is amar achmana. So the Gemara says, lo elamei malach matzah. Even when you do chalot, it's still called matzah. Ulahachi tani beikra, and that's why the Torah says matzah is teyachal b'makam kadosh. Matzah is to tell you that here la'akev, that here matzah cannot be scalded. Ela chalot matzah hi da'amrinan. If not for this, where else do we find that matzah could be chalot? Where is that case? Lamai hilchasa. So the Gemara says that normally yotza loimer sha'adam yotza ba yedei chavasi b'Pesach, that when it comes to the mitzvah of eating matzah on Pesach, that afal pi the chaltei me'ikara, even if someone initially scalded the flour, kiven the hadar afya betanur, if it was immediately baked in the oven in a way that the flour did not turn into chametz, lechem oini karina bay, it's considered the bread of affliction, and va'adam and that's the end of the sugya. We're up to the Mishnah Daf Mem. Okay, moving on in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that if a person did chalitza to his Yevama, then he's still considered like one of the brothers when it comes to the laws of inheritance. So let's read side the Rashi, the top Rashi and the Mishnah. Says Rashi, what does the Mishnah mean? That that the one who does chalitza does not lose his portion amongst his brothers. In other words, when his father passes away, if he's one of many siblings, One might have thought for some reason that being that he did chalitza, he should lose his nachla. So the Mishnah says he doesn't. The Gemara is going to ask, why would you think that he would? Okay, next din in the Mishnah. Now, ve'im yesham av. What is the din? Let's go to Reuven and Shimon and Levi. Reuven was married to Rachel. Reuven passes away. So ve'im yesham av, nochasim shal av. If Reuven passes away, who inherits Reuven? The father. However, the Mishnah continues that hakoines es yevimtoi, if Shimon marries Rachel, Zacheh ben Chasim shel Achiv, Shimon now will get all of Reuven's belongings. The Tanakama, as the Rishonim explain, and likewise Rabbi Yehuda, who argues as the Rishonim explain, are speaking or arguing about two different but connected points. But there are two dinim here. Din number one, Reuven passes away. Let's say Yaakov Avinu is still living. Tanakama says that even though normally, if a person dies without children, if the Yerusha cannot go down to children, to grandchildren, if there's no one underneath the person, it goes up. It doesn't go straight to the brothers, it goes up. Only if the father is not living, then the father's other sons, which would be his brothers, inherit. So Yerusha goes down and up, really. It only goes to the sides because it went up. And if there's no father, then it goes to the father's sons. If there's no father's sons, or their sons, then it goes to the grandfather. And to his sons. Okay. Now, in the case of Yibum, if Reuven dies and Yaakov is still living, even though normally, who would be Yoresh Reuven? Yaakov. Since Shimon did Yibum, Shimon will inherit all of what Reuven left. Halacha number one. Halacha number two. He did Yibum. And at a certain point later, Yaakov passed away. If Reuven would have been living, Reuven would have gotten the chelik of the Yerusha. If he is of the Bachar, he would have gotten the Pishnayim. But whatever Reuven would get, so normally what happens if a father has many children, and God forbid one of them passes away, B'chai the father, so now he has less children. And when the father passes away, so his Yerusha goes to the lesser children. It goes to the children who are living. Here, being that Shimon did Yibum with Rachel's widow Rachel, Shimon did Yibum with Reuven's widow Rachel, Shimon will inherit everything that Reuven would have inherited from Yaakov had Reuven been alive. He's Yerusha twice. First he gets everything when he marries Rachel, then after Yaakov passes away, he gets Reuven's chelik in the Yerusha. And on both dinim, Rabbi Yehuda argues. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Benkach u Benkach, Im Yesham Av, like we said in the Reisha of the Mishnah, Reuven was married to Rachel. He had no children, which is why there's a mitzvah of Yibum. Reuven passes away, even though Shimon did Yibum with Rachel. Don't forget, before Shimon did Yibum, the din of Yerusha is, when Reuven passes away, who inherits Reuven? If Reuven has no children, nor grandchildren, his father. His father was already Yoresh. So Shimon cannot be Yoresh from him again. And as the Rishonim explain, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't only argue the first point, he also argues the second point, which is that Reuven passes away, Yaakov gets everything that he left. That's Aleph. Beis, after Yaakov passes away, if at that time Yaakov had two sons, Shimon and Levi, so then the Yerusha is divided into two, Shimon and Levi, not into three, and Shimon gets Reuven's chelik. Okay, first of all, beginning with the Gemara is focusing on the first line of the Mishnah, that ha'choletz li'yevimta, if a person does chalitza, he's like one of his brothers when it comes to the laws of inheritance. Pshita, why would he not be? So salkadaita chalitza b'makom yibum kaima. So initially the Gemara teaches the Mishnah not the way we read Rashi, the opposite way, which is not the correct way. That the Gemara is saying, no, the Havamina was that since chalitza is in the place of yibum, so maybe, just like the Tanakama holds that Shimon is Yoresh from Reuven if he's Meyabim Rachel, you would have thought that even if he only does Chalitza with Rachel, but it's like Yibum, that the one who does Chalitza gets everything that Reuven owns. That you would think, B'makam Yibum Kaim B'vin Nishkol Kol Nechasi from Reuven, even though he only did Chalitza. So the Mishnah is telling you, no, that if you do Chalitza, you are like one of your brothers. You don't get Reuven's property. So the Gemara says that's not what the Mishnah meant. Why? Because the words of the Mishnah, Harehu ke'echad min ha'achim, These words of the Mishnah should not have been written that way. The Mishnah should have written it that Einoi elo ke'echad min ha'achem mibayalei. If the Havamina is that you get a lot, and the Mishnah is telling you you get less, so the Mishnah should have says you don't get only as much as, less than what you would have thought at. And really, when the Mishnah doesn't use the words Einoi elo, the Mishnah is telling you that you would have thought that he would have gotten nothing. Fakert, the Mishnah is telling you a din, he's at least like one of the brothers. Why would you think he would use the whole Yerusha? That hoyel va'afsuda miyibum, since, not like Abu Shol, since like the Chachamim, that Yibum is preferable to Chalitza. He should have done Yibum, and he didn't. So let's punish him, even though he did Chalitza, by him losing his Yerusha and his father, Kamash Malan, even if he does Chalitza, he doesn't lose his Chelik amongst the brothers. Im Yesham Av, that B'chlal the din that Yerusha doesn't go from a brother to a brother. Yerusha goes from a parent to a child, grandchild, and if there's no one underneath it, the next in line is not to the sides, not to the siblings, but up. It goes to the father. To Amar Mar, Av Choydem L'chol Yoytze Yerechai. Even if, and even when there are times that Shimon will yashin from Reuven, but the way it works is, Reuven dies. Reuven left no children or grandchildren, and Yaakov is not living when Reuven dies. In such a case, Shimon will be Yodesh from Reuven, but he gets it through getting Yerusha from his father. So it goes from Reuven to Yaakov. Being that Yaakov is not living, it goes to Yaakov's children. In other words, the father Yaakov comes before the other children. According to the Tanakama, both dinim, that Shimon will yarshin Reuven's chelik, both now and after Yaakov passes away, Maitama, because it says Yakum al Shem Achiv Amar Rachmana, that he should stand up in his place. And these are words that are also used when it comes to Dinei Yerusha. V'harei kam, he did Yibum. So therefore he is in his brother's place also when it comes to Reuven's properties, when it comes to Reuven's belongings. Rabbi Yehuda argues, says the Gemara Marula, the halach is like Rabbi Yehuda. V'chein Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, halach ke Rabbi Yehuda. Now, Marula v'tem Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, why does Rabbi Yehuda hold what he holds? Because it says in the pasuk, "V'hoya hapchor asher teiled," and if you remember, we learned before in the Gemara the meaning of this pasuk, and the Gemara learned this pasuk out of its literal meaning. That the pasuk here was not speaking about the child that's born from the mitzvah of Yibum, but "V'hoya habachar" is referring to who should do the Yibum, and Bachar doesn't mean Bachar. Bachar means the oldest living brother. That V'hoya B'char Shetela, this is referring to the Yavam himself. And the Torah calls him a B'char. Why do we call him a B'char? Ke B'char, because the one who does Yibum becomes like a B'char. Like what? Ma B'char ein lo b'chaya av, av hainami ein lo b'chaya av. The reason why the Torah uses the B'char is to tell you that if Yaakov was living when Reuven died, then Shimon, who married Rachel, will not inherit anything from Reuven, just like a Bechor only inherits after Yaakov passes away. Likewise over here. So the Gemara asks, okay, that explained why Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with the first point with the Tanakama. But like we explained the Mishnah, they're arguing in two dinim. Rabbi Yehuda also argues that even after Yaakov dies, Shimon does not get Reuven's chelik. Why not? So let Rabbi Yehuda at least say, Af hai noitel pishnayim la'achar misosoav. Answers the Gemara, I'll tell you why it's not true. Because midi yakom al shem aviv ksiv. If Shimon will inherit from Yaakov, then who is he inheriting from? He's getting from the father. And the Torah does not say that he stands in the place of his father, or that he gets from his father. It says, Yakom al Shem Achiv Ksiv, and V'loi al Shem Aviv. And what does it mean, Yakom al Shem Aviv, according to Rabbi Yehuda? It will mean the following, that if when Reuven died, and subsequently Shimon did Yibum with Rachel, if Yaakov was not living then, there is where Rabbi Yehuda agrees with the Tanakama that Yakom al Shem Aviv, al Shem Achiv. Since there wasn't a Yaakov Avinu, so therefore, and Reuven has no children, so what would the din normally be? That Reuven's belongings will be divided amongst all of the brothers. But now that one of the brothers did Yibum, he will get all of it. So ask the Gemara, if the pasuk that's speaking about Yibum, which is also using the words Yakum al Shem Achiv, which is referring to this case of Nachalo where Yaakov is not living, why don't we say that the whole mitzvah of Yibum is only if the dad is not living? Ema hechi deleka av. Why don't we say, according to Rabbi Yehuda's interpretation of the verse, that when Reuven dies, leaving Rachel as a widow, when Yaakov is also not living, then in such a case, the one who does Yibum would take the Nachli, even according to Rabbi Yehuda. Maybe only then Tiskayim mitzvahs Yibum. Maybe only then is there the mitzvah of Yibum. But Heicha de'ika av. But wherever, when Reuven dies, Yaakov, his father, is still living. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, then the loy shakal nachla, then Shimon, who does Yibum, will not inherit Reuven's property. Perhaps Leitzkayim mitzvahs Yibum altogether, because the Torah puts it together.
So you think they'd be together the same?
Maybe there's no din of Yibum when there's no din of Nachla. Right. So the Gemara counters, according to Rabbi Yehuda, midi Yibum ben Nachla tola Nachmana. The Torah did not make that link. The Torah is telling you, Yabume me Yabma. The Torah is telling you, do Yibum. And then the Torah notifies you, you should know that if Yaakov is not living, he'll also get all Reuven's property. That Ika Nachla Shkuli, because Yaakov is not living. But the Rabbi Yehuda says, but V'iloi. But if when Reuven dies, his father was living, the moment Reuven died, Yaakov was Yerush from him. So then, Loi Shakal. So when Shimon does Yibum, he doesn't have from whom to get it. Yaakov already took it. Yosef Rab Chanina Kara. Rab Chanina, the master verse, the master pasuk reader, was sitting in front of Rabbi Yanai, and Yosef Vika Amar, and this Rab Chanina Kara said, he quoted the Braisa that recorded both the opinions of the Tanakama, both dinim, and Rabbi Yehuda's opinions, and then he concluded words of the Braisa halachik Rabbi Yehuda. So Amalei, so Rabbi Yana, he told Rabbi Chanina, Poik, go out and kari kirayach lebara. Go read the psukim outside my yeshiva. You're telling me a Braisa that can be, because ein halachik Rabbi Yehuda. Another story the Gemara says, Tani Kamed Rab Nachman, someone who was a master in the knowledge of Braisas by heart, was reading Braisas in front of Rab Nachman. Again, there was a Braisa which recorded Chachamim, recorded Rabbi Yehuda, and then it said there, Ein halachik Rabbi Yehuda. That was the way the Braisa concluded. So Amalei, so Rab Nachman commented, these words cannot be correct. Why? Ela Kaman. In other words, it's written in the negative. The halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda, which means the halacha is like whom? Like the Chachamim. Pshita. Yachid v'rabim, halacha kirabim. There was no need to say that. So Amalei, so this Tana, this Amoida that was saying Braisas by heart, asked Rab Nachman, you're right. So maybe the whole Braisa is mistaken. So Ismay, should I erase this entire Braisa? Is it wrong because those words can be correct? So maybe the whole Braisa is not correct? Amalei, don't erase the Braisa. At halachis nayach. Rab Nachman told him, listen, I'm sure that when you initially heard the Braisa and you recorded it in your mind from memory, you probably heard the Braisa saying halachik Rabbi Yehuda, which is a chiddush. No, it's halachik yachid. This also answers why it was written in the negative. Normally, when you have an argument, you either say the halach is like this one, or you say the halach is like that one. You don't say the halach is not like. Really, you originally heard halachik Rabbi Yehuda, and mistama umukshuhu da akshilach, and that bothered you. It didn't make sense to you because yachid v'rabim halachik rabim. So you ve'apacht, you turned it around. So you said ein halachik Rabbi Yehuda. So first of all, the Braisa is correct. The argument between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda is correct. We have it in our Mishnah. The words ein halachik Rabbi Yehuda is wrong. In other words, the Braisa there said halachik Rabbi Yehuda, but we don't paskin like the Braisa because your question ulamai the achpacht. The apacht, shapir apacht, the reason why you reversed it is a good reason. Because really, the halach is not like Rabbi Yehuda, halachik kerabim, halachik chachamim, that even if Yaakov is living, the brother who does Yibum, A, gets all of the belongings of the deceased brother. B, after their father dies, he will also get the chelik that his brother would have gotten had he been alive. Shimon will get that portion as well. Next Mishnah.
Even the double portion if he was a Bukhar.
If he was a Bukhar, if he wasn't a Bukhar, whatever he would have gotten when he would be alive, the Yavam will get. So let's say a father had 10 sons, none of them is a Bukhar.
Oh, you're saying the portion from the father.
Yaakov had a girl, then he had Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Means when Yaakov normally would have died, his belongings would have been divided into thirds. Reuven died, B'chai Yehoav, and Shimon did Yibum. Aleph, whatever Reuven owned, belongs now to Shimon. Beis, after Yaakov passes away, now he has only Shimon and Levi. Yaakov's belongings will be divided into 3, and Shimon will get his brother's portion as well. Exactly. Next Mishnah. Now, the dinim of this Mishnah we learned before, and this Gemara is going to just talk it through with more details. Ha'choylitz liyavintoi. When a person does chalitza, midai raisa, when a man divorces his wife, all of the relatives of his wife to whom he was not allowed to marry while he was married to his wife, right? A man cannot marry his wife's mother, a man cannot marry his wife's sister, a man cannot marry his wife's daughter, v'chule, v'chule. All of those women remain prohibited even after there is a get, mida'ei raisa. Right? The only exception we learned is that the prohibition of a person marrying one's wife's sister, that isur goes away when one wife dies, which is an exception. Normally an erva is an erva. So a person cannot marry his mother-in-law, even if his wife dies, or if he divorces her, that woman can never marry the son-in-law. The Chachamim said that even though chalitza is not a get, the Chachamim treats a chalutza like a gerusha, which means that all of the women with whom Reuven, let's go, Reuven was married to Rachel. Reuven cannot marry Rachel's mother. Reuven dies. Reuven left Shimon and Levi. Shimon was the one that did chalitza. So now the Chachamim said, Shimon cannot marry Rachel's mother and Rachel's daughter. No, it's all of the women, all of the relatives that Reuven was asur to, Shimon will become asur to. Number 1, and then number 2, also in reverse. Vihi, same thing like this. A divorced woman, a woman cannot marry her father-in-law. Erva. So, and even if there's a get. So same thing over here, that now that Shimon did chalitza with Rachel, Rachel cannot marry his relatives. Vihi asura b'krayvav, turning the page. And the Mishnah gives examples. Who, we're saying that he is asur in kroivas chalutzasoi. Who would that be? Be'ima, right? In Rachel's mother, he did chalitza with Rachel. Ube'eim ima, ube'eim avia, and in the daughter of Rachel, in the granddaughter, daughter's daughter, the son's daughter, in her sister. But when it comes to the sister, it's only while Rachel is still living. Why? Because just like in a real marriage with a get, mida'ei raisa. So let's say Reuven married Rachel. If Rachel dies, he can marry Leah, the sister. So here also, Shimon did chalitza with Rachel, so midrabanan he cannot marry Leah. It's achois chalutzasei. But if Rachel dies, the mother not, the daughter not, but the sister, yeah. But v'ha'achim, the Gemara wants to clarify. Reuven died. Reuven left 2 brothers, Shimon and Levi. Shimon did chalitza with Rachel. Now don't forget that before Shimon did chalitza, what did we learn in the previous chapters, especially according to the opinions that hold yesh zika, the isur, before you can't marry the kroivas chalitza, you cannot marry kroivas zika. Achais zikukasei. So why did the Chachamim have to add another isur by chalutzasei?
Does that include her Sarah?
Yeah, then yes, because before Yibum or Chalitza was done, the connection was between all of the brothers and all of the wives. Now that Shimon was the one that did Chalitza, so now that retroactively clarified that the Zika was only between Rachel and Shimon, now Levi, no. According to everyone, so now Levi v'ha'achim is allowed to marry Rachel's mother. Before Shimon did chalitza nor yibum, Levi was not allowing Rachel's mother. But now that he did it, that's the chiddush, that the isur remains on the chalutz. The one who did chalitza cannot marry her relatives.
The brother who he's allowed to.
Exactly, but v'ha'achim mutar. Let's go the other way. What's the second din? That she cannot marry the relatives of Shimon, of the one who did chalitza. He, this widow, this Rachel, cannot marry Shimon's father, cannot marry Shimon's grandfather, his father's father, his son's son, his brother, and his nephew, a nephew and an aunt. Now, the Mishnah concludes with two dinim, which you mentioned one of them before. However, mutar adam b'kreivas saras chalutzasai. Let's say Reuven was married to Rachel and to Miriam, two wives. Reuven died. Shimon chose to do chalitza with Rachel. So with Rachel's relatives, midrabanan, he's usher to ever get married. But now, again, this chalitza retroactively just made the zika between Rachel and Shimon, to no one else. So Shimon now could marry the relatives of Miriam. Miriam not. We learned that before. Our machlekes is that an erva of Eishes Ach, or is it only the lav of Kivin Shaloi Bana Shuv Lo Yivna? But for sure he cannot marry the Tzaras Chalutzasai, but Kreivas Tzaras Chalutzasai, even Midrabanan he could marry. And the din number two, I'm going to learn this next din the way Rashi learns it. There's a machlekes Rishayim. But Va'asr, Shimon remains Asr. Shimon who did Chalitza with Rachel. B'tzaras Kreivas Chalutzasai. What is that case? Let's read the last Rashi in the Mishnah. So instead of using Shimon, Rashi spoke about Reuven. Reuven did chalitza with Leah. Leah had a sister. Leah has a sister. What did we say? We just said that midrabanan, Shimon, right now she's giving the case, Reuven who did chalitza, not only is he not allowed to marry Leah, he's not allowed to marry her sister. Now Rachel then was married, according to Rashi, to a non-relative. Rachel was married to Chaim. And Chaim had a second wife. Now let's say Chaim is going to die or divorce his wives. So the din will be, look at the Chumrah, look how far it goes, that the one who did Chalitza is not allowed to marry the co-wife of the relative of his Chalutza. And the Gemara will explain why. So on one hand, we limit this rabbinic law, but here it's mamash far-fetched. So in the words that we're using, so Shimon did chalitza with Rachel. Rachel has a sister called Leah, which remains aser to Shimon. That's called, you can't marry kreivas chalutzasei. But this Leah married Chaim. Chaim has a co-wife Miriam, that even if Miriam becomes a single, a non-married woman, Shimon can never marry that Miriam. And we'll see why. Okay. First, the Gemara has a simple question. And these are one of these Gemaras that without illustrations, some of it will be difficult. We're not going to talk through clearly all the cases, just suggesting people to look at a Gemara that comes with good illustrations. But the Nikud of the Gemara is very simple. The Mishnah taught us in the first din that the Chachamim said that a man, midrabanan, cannot have a relation with the relatives of his Chalutza. We learned in Daf Chaf Aleph and Daf Chaf Beis that when it comes to aroyos, relatives, you have relatives mido'eraisa, called aroyos, or in singular an erva, and then we learned our shniyos, that there are relatives that are a little bit more removed, but they are asr mido'eraisa. The Gemara wants to know one thing. When the Chachamim said that a man is not allowed to have a relation with the relatives of his chalutza, the relatives are only the De'oraisa relatives, or does it also include the Shniyas relatives? Very simple. The maskan of this Gemara is going to be that it included Shniyas as well, but we're going to have to prove it. Let's read it inside. So it says the Gemara, the Gemara asked, Gazru Shniyas B'chalutzai, or Oiloi, and the Gemara explains, Be'erva, which is a De'oraisa, that means if the original problem is a De'oraisa, so then it makes sense, the Chachamim added even the Shniyas. But when it comes to chalutza, shniyos b'chalutza, loy gazer rabbanan shniyos. It's almost like a double the rabbanan. Oi, Dilma, which will be the conclusion that loishna. In other words, it's not a double derabanan. When the Chachamim says a man, if he would have done Yibum and then divorced, if Shimon would have done Yibum with Rachel and divorced her, he would have been Asr with all of those relatives, the Do'eraisa relatives, and the Rabbanan relatives. Yeah, it's one thing together. Then the Chachamim says, even though you didn't do Yibum, you did Chalitza. Chalitza is like a Gerusha when it comes to these dinim. So Tashema. In our Mishnah it says, Hu Asr bi'ima. We're speaking about the Chalutza, right? The Chalutza, Shimon, cannot marry Rachel's mother. U be'eim ima. And with Rachel's grandmother. By the way, a grandmother is an erva de'oraisa. What would be a shniya? The great grandmother. That would be one case of a shniya. Ve'ilu aim ima. The Mishnah doesn't write l'cha'ira because there is no isur on a shniya. So the Gemara answers, Dilma hainu tamad leitanan mishum de kabaya lemisna seifa. V'ha'achim mutarim, being that the Sefer in the Mishnah says later that only Shimon is used in her relatives, right? But Shimon's brothers, who could have done Yibum and Chalitza but didn't, they are permitted. If the Mishnah would have spoken about a great grandmother, you know what you would have thought? That when the Mishnah says later, but the brothers could marry, you would think that the brothers can only marry the Shniya. But maybe you would have mistakenly learned that the brothers still cannot marry the erva. But you would have mistakenly thought that even the brothers are usher with her mother or grandmother. That's why the Mishnah spoke about the mother and grandmother, and the Gemara right away counters. That's not a good response, because the Mishnah could have written both. But vilitani, both aim ima, and the Mishnah should have written that v'ha'achim mutarim bikulan be'ima u'be'em ima kasha. Kasha always in the Gemara doesn't mean a tiyufta. So this is not a conclusive proof, which is why the Gemara continues to attempt to prove one way or the other. And actually, at the end, we're going to learn that shniyas are aser, not the way we're saying here shniyas are mutter. Tashma, it says in our Mishnah, he asur ba'aviv, that she, the other way around, that Rachel got chalitza from Shimon, cannot marry Shimon's father, cannot marry Shimon's grandfather. Ba'avi aviv. Right? U'ba'avi aviv. Ktani miya. It says that she cannot marry his grandfather. Why not? We're going to see right now that this isur is a shniya. She, with Shimon's grandfather, what is she to the grandfather? She's not called a daughter-in-law, it's called your son's daughter-in-law. Son's daughter-in-law, Yaakov, is a shniya. Oh, my love, mishum chaylitz, tahabal kalas b'noi. A man, midrabanan, shniya, cannot marry his son's daughter-in-law. So clearly you see that they did make the gzeira on a daughter-in-law. So Gemara has a great answer, and we're going to try to work this until we can't. 1 second. Before Shimon did chalitza with Rachel, who was Rachel married to? To Reuven. Oh, shkoyach. We're speaking about Shimon's father's father, which also happens to be Reuven's father's father. She was married to Reuven, which means that she's usher to Reuven's grandfather, Taka Mitzat Shniya, but that's not because of the Isur Chachamim of Chalutza, because she was married. So that's why the Mishnah says she can't marry him.
This was already there.
Yeah, the one says, Loi, not because of the Isur of Krevis Chalitza goes on Shniyas. Mishum Misna, because of the dead husband. The Havala Kalas Banoi. Doesn't prove.
So
We'll use this answer until we can't. Tashma, next, it says in the Mishnah that she cannot marry Ben Benoi. She cannot marry L'chayra Shimon's grandson, which also happens to be, what is Shimon's grandson to Reuven? Don't forget, she was Reuven's wife. It was no. The grandfather's brother's wife. Shimon's grandson, what is that to Reuven? Reuven is the grandfather's brother's
great uncle.
Yeah, okay. The grandfather's brother's wife. And we learned that in Machlekes if they're Shni or not. Oh, my lab, Mishum Chaylitz. And again, the Havala Mishum Eshes Avi Aviv. And Eshes Avi Aviv, the wife of a grandfather, is only called a Shniya. So you have a right that Shniya is Aser and Loy. She's not Aser because of her relationship with Shimon as a Chalutza. That Isser is because of her relationship with Reuven, the one who passed away. And what is she to that? She is the wife of the grandfather's brother. Eshes Achi Avi Aviv. So the Gemara now challenges, that answer would work if a shnia would indeed be on one's grandfather's brother's wife. But on Meimar, we learned this in Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, there were two questions that were put together. We're going to have both of them here again. One of them was, Machsher be'eshes achi avi aviv. A Meimar says that there is no shnia by one's grandfather's brother's wife. So how would L'chayda does that not prove, according to Ameimar, that the Chachamim were also asad the Shnia? So the Gemara answers, Ameimar Moikila, Ameimar is going to doichik now. Bibar Barad Saba. Until now, whenever we spoke about his, who was the his? Who was the reference point? Shimon, the one who did Chalitza, with his son, with his. So now Meimir is going to have to learn the Mishnah that his doesn't go to the Chalutz, it goes to the Chalutz's father. So when we speak about his son, the his is not Shimon's. It's only his son. It's not his grandson. Which would mean that when it comes to the Reuven, that would be a Midoraisa. Oh. So if that's the case, that means who is the grandson? The grandson is really a nephew from Reuven. The Mishnah already says you can't marry a nephew. Why are you repeating the same case twice? The Mishnah says you can't marry the son's son, nor the brother, nor the son's brother, if the hin, according to Ameimar, the reference is not the chalotzes. It's almost weird. You're speaking about his son. Right. Ben Benoi means his father's son. But if that's the case, you're repeating the same case twice. So the Gemara answers, Tana achiv min ha'av, uktana achim min ha'aim, and for this you need to have an illustration. But if you'll have the right picture, you'll see that there are two options. One of them, both of them will be nephews, but one of them is connected paternally and maternally, and one of them is connected paternally, and for both of them are asur because of her marriage to Reuven, and therefore you don't have a raya that shnias by a chalitza is asur.
Because in either one of those cases, it's not a shnia.
Correct. Okay. Or it's a shnia from Reuven. That's the key. Or it's a shnia from Reuven and not from Shimon.
And therefore,
by Shimon, that goes on shnias. Tan Rabban and the Tani Rabchiyam. Rab Chia says that after a woman undergoes chalitza, and we learned in our Mishnah that she's ushered in his relatives, how many are there? So Rab Chia says there are 4 tighter relatives, and there are 4 rabbinic relatives. We'll see soon what that means. It doesn't necessarily mean shnias. Av, ubenoi, achiv, uben achiv medivrei Torah, avi aviv, va'avi imoi, ben benoi, uben bitoi, medivrei Torah. Now let's work it out. What did Rab Chia l'chayda say? Avi aviv. And what would be the iser? My love mishum chaylitz. And what is the relationship between her and Avi aviv? Or between, that's a man cannot marry midoraisa, his son's wife. And the shniya is a man cannot marry his grandson's wife. That's the relationship here. Havalakalas benoi. So here again you can answer, why? It's not because of the chalitza, the chalutz, it's because Reuven is here. And that's taka a shniya to Reuven. Lemishum misna, because of the dead one, the havakalas benoi. Toshma, it says weiter, avi imoi. What's the avi imoi? One's father, the father of one's mother. That's a shniya. So the Gemara answers, havakalas bitoi. No, mishum misna. The havakalas bitoi. Tashma again, Ben Benoi. My love, what's the issue with Ben Benoi? If the reference point is the Choylitz, and what's the problem with the Choylitz is the Havala Eshes, Avi Aviv, right? Midoraisa, man cannot marry his father's wife. Midrabanan Ashniya is, one cannot marry your father's wife, Ashniya. Asr, again we are attempting, no, Mishum Misna. Now, Misna would mean the Havala Eshes, Achi Avi Aviv, because now if you're not saying it's Shimon's, it's Reuven's, so that would be one's father's brother's wife. If the Isra is coming from Reuven, and go back to Ameimar. But Ameimar machshid the Eshes Achi Avi Aviv. Ameimar said that there is no such shniya. There is a shniya if the reference point is Shimon, but not from Reuven. But here you see it's asur. So Ameimer Maikmula Mishum Chaylitz. So now the Gemara concedes that according to Ameimer, the only isur is only if it starts from Shimon, and Take the Gozrur the Kosavar, according to Ameimer at least, that the isur midrabanan, that you can't there's an isur on marrying the kreivas chalutza, so it goes on shniyas. Now we'll see it's not only according to Ameimer. Tashma, it says uben bitoy, one's daughter's son, and my love chaylitz. And what's the relationship? Let's go the other way. The relationship is Eishes, Avi Imai, which is only a Shniya. So the Gemara says, Lai Mishum Misna. And what will be that relationship with the Misna? That would be Eishes, Achi, Avi Imai. One's mother's, father's, brother's wife. If you have the illustration, it will be simple. Father's brother's wife. The Gemara says, V'ha Gabi Shniya is the erva loy gazru. No one holds that if the reference is Reuven, the husband, there is no isur, even of Shniyas, on one's mother's, father's, brother's wife. From Reuven. Elalav, it must be only starting from Shimon, from the Chaylitz. So finally, Shmamina, gozru Shniyas, B'chalutza, Shmamina. Wife, that case cannot be.
That can't be because of Reuven.
It can't be the brother's wife. It has to be her herself. You can't begin from Reuven, because from Reuven it's the mother's father's brother's wife. But there is no Isur at all.
Right.
So the mother's father's wife can only be Asr if the reference is Shimon. And the Isur would be a Shniya, because even if Shimon would have been married to her, then the Isur would only be a Shniya. So here you see the Asr Shniyas. Right. Then it says in the Mishnah, Mutar Adam. Then the Mishnah said, Mutar Adam b'kroivas tzaras chalutzasei. No, here on the top.
Yeah, okay.
In other words, Reuven had Rachel, and Reuven had Miriam. Shimon did chalitza with Rachel. So everything you learned in the Mishnah is only vis-a-vis Rachel and Shimon and Rachel. But Shimon can marry Miriam's sister, let's say. Amar Rav Tumi bar Kisna Amar Shmuel. That you should know that Haba al Tzoras Chalutza, that's not the case of our Mishnah. Tzoras Chalutza means Reuven was married to Rachel and to Miriam. Shimon went ahead and Shimon did Chalitza with Rachel. He cannot be with Miriam. Right. What's the Isur? So if you remember, we learned before, there's a Machlekes Hamoraim. Is it the Erva of Eishesach? If it's an erva, then a havlad mamzer, or is it a lav of kivin shalei bana shuv le'yivna? Very good. So Shmuel said, if I'm not mistaken, that's a shita of Reish Lakish. Yeah, he was the machmer. Reish Lakish only allowed the lav to stay on the chalutza herself, but you marry the tzara havlad mamzer. My tama, because the original isur of Eishesach is there. We learned the same thing in Abraisa. Mutar Adam bikroivas tzaras chalutzasai. What we learned in our Mishnah, that a man is allowed to marry the relative of Miriam. Now, amarte bishloimet tzara abroi. Let me explain this. Let's go back to Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. Why would the relationship between Shimon and Miriam be Eishes Ach? Or why would it only be the lav kibin shalei bana shuv le'yivna? So the Gemara said the following: when Shimon did chalitza with Rachel, before he did chalitza with Rachel, with whom was his zika? He was connected both to Rachel and to Miriam. He did it only with Rachel, but the din is that both wives are allowed to marry anyone. How did that work? One way of looking at it would be that Rachel was Miriam's shlucha. They're together. So the act that he did to her, Shimon gave chalitza to Rachel. It's as if he also gave chalitza to Miriam. If you look at it that way, that they're both connected, and what happened to one really happened to both, then just like Shimon's subsequent relation with Rachel herself will not be an erva relationship. It's a lav. You're not allowed to get married. Kivin shalei bana shuv le'yivna, but it's not an erva, nor should it be an erva with the tzara, because they're both together. They represented each other. Reish Lakish, who's the one that holds that the isur lav was only with Rachel. But if you're going to get married to Miriam, it goes back to the original erva, because they don't represent each other. Now let's connect this to the din of the Mishnah. The Chachamim said a man cannot have a relation with the relative of the woman with whom he did chalitza. Those opinions who hold that the chalutza, which is Rachel, was a shliach of Miriam, so they should both be considered chalutzos. And if they're both considered chalutzos, this is the premise of the question, which will be challenged later, then just like the Chachamim said that Shimon cannot have a relation with Rachel's relatives, likewise it should have gone on Miriam's relatives. She's also a chalutza. Because she took it as shlichus. She represented one the other. So now the Gemara says that the fact that Shmuel says Havlad Mamzer, why is Havlad Mamzer? Because Rachel was not a shlucha from Miriam. They're not connected. Now it makes sense. Now that they're not connected, in this lakula, in other words, not connected means that the dispensation, the downgrading of the prohibition, only stays on Rachel, doesn't go to Miriam. They're not connected. Now it comes out of leniency. That when the Chachamim says you can't have a relation with the relatives of your chalutza, it only goes to Rachel. It doesn't go to Miriam. They're not connected. It's going to be a kasha against Rabbi Yochanan, really. Because the fact that it says in our Mishnah, Mutar Adam Ekrev V'Saras Chalutza, why not? Why would it not be Asr also on the relatives of Miriam? Don't forget, before Yibum or Chalitza was done, who was Shimon connected to? Who was the Zika with? Both of them. And at that point, Shimon was not to have a relation with the relatives of either of them. So, Iyamarta Bishloimet Tzara Abroi, that is no shlichus, the Tzara, Miriam and Rachel are not together. When Shimon gave Chalitza to Rachel, it was only with Rachel. Which is why the Shlakish holds that later the Isur between Shimon and Miriam is Mamash Eishes Acha Erva. This Mishnah makes sense. Mishumachi Mutter Ba'achoisa, the Chachamim says you can't have a relation with the Karevim of your Chalutza. The Chalutza was only Rachel, not Miriam. But Eli Yomarta like Rabbi Yechanan, that's Saraka Chalutza Dami. Which is why, in that case, Rabbi Yochanan was lenient. He says that just like after Chalitza was done with Miriam, if Shimon now has a relation with Miriam, which is Asr, Miday Raisa, but it's not an Erva, it's likewise not an Erva to Miriam because Miriam and Rachel are connected. Well, if they are connected, they should also be connected for this prohibition. Amai muted, leima tehebet yosef Rabbi Yochanan. The Omar Beinu Bein Achim Ein Chayovin Loyal Chalutza Kares V'Loyal Tzarasa Kares. What's Rabbi Yechanan's leniency when it comes to the union between Shimon and the Tzara should l'chayda be a chumrah in our Mishnah. So Rabbi Yechanan challenges the whole premise. Amalach Rabbi Yechanan v'tizbera achos chalutza de'oraisa. The whole din of our Mishnah is a derabanan. And v'amar Rabbi Yechanan, v'amar Reish Lakish, that kan shana Rebbe, achos gerusha is asur midoraisa. Achos chalutza is only asur midorabanan. And yes, Rabbi Yechanan holds that when Rachel took chalitza, she took it as a representative also from her co-wife Miriam. Yes. Nevertheless, since our Mishnah is only recording an Isur Derabanan, the Chachamim said that the Isur Miderabanan of Achos Chalutzasai only goes on the woman to whom he gave chalitza. Even if she was a shluch of Miriam. Period. Yeah, it made it less. The only thing the Gemara needs to explain, we'll finish up, is why at the end of the Mishnah, when the Mishnah was speaking about the limit of this decree, and a man is allowed to have a relationship with the co-wife, not with her, but the relatives of the co-wife of your chalutza, then the Mishnah gave one example, the way we explained by Rashi, that v'asur b'tzaras krevas chalutzasai. Again, the case that the way Rashi explained it is that let's use our names. Shimon did chalitza with Rachel, which means midrabanan Shimon cannot marry Leah. Not only did Leah's sister. Not only did the Chachamim aser Leah, but if Leah was married to Chaim was married to another woman, and that husband died, Shimon cannot even marry that other woman because she is the co-wife of the sister of the woman with whom he did chalitza. So the Gemara says, Maishnaho, Maishnahai. Why did they go so far in this case? And they didn't say, by the normal co-wife, that you can marry her Karevim. So the Gemara gives a very interesting psychological answer. And the answer is like this, say it by heart. When a woman goes to Beis Din The truth is, men or women, most of us need moral support. When it comes to a get, it's very common. A woman gets a get, she'll come with some family member of hers. The example here, she'll come with her sister. A woman is going to get chalitza, she'll come with her sister. Very unlike when a man gives chalitza to Miriam and there was a co-wife, the tzara doesn't come. They're called tzaras, even though we keep on saying co-wife. Tzaras means that when two women then were married to one husband, they didn't always get along so well. They were like in competition. An observer is watching Rachel coming to court to get chalitza from Shimon. That's the example. Who was Rachel coming with? Rachel was coming with Leah. Leah was not married to Reuven, but people don't know that. People see Rachel and Leah walking into Beis for a chalitza ceremony. People mistakenly might think that Shimon gave chalitza to whom? To Leah. And what did the Chachamim say? Because they wanted to make, such a mistake could happen. But since when a woman gets chalitza, she comes into court with moral support, with her sister, not with her co-wife, you might confuse them. That's right. So therefore you might think that maybe Leah got chalitza, Shimon gave it to Leah, and everyone knows that the Chachamim said a man cannot have a relation with the relatives of his chalutza. So, and for sure not with her co-wife. The co-wife of your chalutza is either an erva, according to the Shlakish, according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's a isur midaraisa. Kivin shalei bana shulei yivna. So therefore, if Shimon is later going to have a relation with the co-wife of Leah, people are going to think that such a relation is mutter. However, when a woman is coming to get chalitza, she never comes with her co-wife. So the Chachamim never made a gzeira to ask Shimon with the relatives of the co-wife. Let's read it inside. The sister Leah, the Azl Bahada, that's coming with Rachel Beidina when she's getting her chalitza. Again, people might mistake, they won't know who got chalitza. Rachel got chalitza. They might think that Leah got chalitza. Gazeru Rabbanan. But the co-wife of Rachel, the Loy Azl Bahada Beidina, is Loy Gazeru Rabbanan. Stop over here. Hashem to continue the next year.